The judge lifted the verdict and looked across the silent courtroom. One more sentence, and the most feared mafia boss in the country would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Then the courtroom doors slammed open. A young woman rushed inside, soaked by the rain, clutching a faded leather journal tightly against her chest. Every head turned. Every camera swung toward her. Without catching her breath, she cried out, "Please, don't read the verdict yet." The room froze. The prosecutor's face lost its color. The defense attorney lowered his eyes as if he had just seen a ghost. But the man standing in handcuffs never looked at the judge. His eyes were fixed on the young woman. For the first time in more than 20 years, Matteo Romano, the man newspapers called a ruthless mafia king, looked completely broken. Tears filled his eyes. Because the face standing in that courtroom looked exactly like the woman he had loved more than his own life. And the journal in her hands. He had given it to Isabella on the night they promised to run away together. Only two people should have known that journal even existed: Matteo and the woman who had supposedly died 23 years earlier. The judge slowly lowered the papers. "Who are you?" he asked. The young woman took one shaky step forward. "My name is Elena." She swallowed hard before saying the words that left the courtroom speechless. "I believe I'm his daughter." A wave of whispers swept across the room. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The jurors stared at one another. The judge ordered silence, but silence was impossible. For 23 years, everyone believed Matteo Romano's wife and newborn daughter had died in a mysterious attack. Their graves had been visited. Flowers had been placed there every year. The tragedy had become part of the city's history. So how could his daughter suddenly be standing in front of him? No one was more confused than Matteo himself. He searched Elena's face for answers. She had Isabella's gentle eyes, the same determined expression. Even the small scar above her eyebrow matched the scar Isabella had carried since childhood. Matteo's heart whispered something his mind refused to believe. Could this impossible miracle be real? Long before people feared his name, Matteo had been nothing more than a young man desperate for a normal life. He had been born into the Romano family, where loyalty was expected and freedom was almost impossible. But everything changed the day he met Isabella. She wasn't connected to crime. She taught piano to children and dreamed of opening a small music school by the sea. She laughed easily. She believed every problem could be solved with kindness. Against every warning, they fell deeply in love. To Matteo, she wasn't an escape from his world. She was the reason he believed another world was possible. When Isabella told him she was pregnant, Matteo made the biggest decision of his life. He would leave everything behind: the money, the power, the family name. None of it mattered if it meant raising their daughter in peace. They bought fake passports. They packed only what they could carry. They chose a quiet coastal town where no one knew the name Romano. Their future was only days away. Then, overnight, it disappeared. Matteo came home to find the apartment destroyed. Furniture overturned. Blood on the floor. No Isabella. No baby. Hours later, a small white coffin arrived with no return address. Inside lay a hospital bracelet bearing his newborn daughter's name. No body. No explanation. Only enough evidence to convince everyone they were gone. Something inside Matteo died that night. The man who believed in second chances vanished. The man who trusted people disappeared. In his place stood a leader feared by enemies and respected by allies. He built walls around his heart so high that no one ever climbed them again. Not because he stopped loving Isabella, but because loving her had become too painful to survive. Now, standing in that courtroom, every wall he had built began to crack. Elena carefully placed the old leather journal on the evidence table. "I didn't come here because of his reputation," she said quietly. "I came because my mother wanted me to know the truth." Those words hit Matteo harder than any bullet ever could. My mother. If Isabella had lived, where had she been? Why had she never returned? Who had stolen 23 years from them? Before anyone could ask another question, the prosecutor abruptly stood. He objected, insisting the hearing continue without delay. His voice sounded calm, but his trembling hands told a different story. The judge noticed. So did Elena. And hidden in the last row of the courtroom, an older man quietly unlocked his phone and typed a single message. The girl found him. Stop the DNA test before morning. Elena never saw him, but someone else did. And before the sun set, the search for the truth would become far more dangerous than anyone inside that courtroom could imagine. The courtroom emptied under heavy police security, but no one truly left. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Television stations interrupted their regular broadcasts. Social media exploded with one question: who was Elena? The judge postponed the verdict for 48 hours and ordered an immediate DNA test. It was a routine legal decision, but for someone hiding the truth, those 48 hours felt like a death sentence. Mateo was taken back to his holding cell. For the first time in years, he couldn't think about lawyers, evidence, or prison. He could only picture Isabella's smile and the young woman who carried the same quiet strength. Across town, Elena sat in a small hotel room, unable to sleep. The faded leather journal rested on the bed beside her. She had protected it her entire life without fully understanding why. The woman who raised her had never claimed to be her biological mother. She simply asked Elena to keep the journal safe until the day she was old enough to search for the truth. That woman had died 6 months earlier. Before taking her final breath, she whispered one sentence that changed Elena's life forever: "Find Matteo Romano before it's too late." At first, Elena refused. She had heard the stories. Everyone had. The newspapers painted Matteo as a heartless criminal. How could someone like that possibly be her father? But curiosity slowly defeated fear. When she finally opened the journal, she discovered it wasn't filled with secrets about the Mafia. It was filled with love. Every page belonged to Isabella. There were stories about late-night walks, handwritten songs Matteo had composed for her despite barely knowing how to play the piano, and sketches of the tiny beach house where they dreamed of raising their child. One page stopped Elena's heart. "If our daughter ever reads this." Her hands trembled as she continued. "I hope you inherited your father's courage and not my fear. He may seem frightening to the world one day, but never believe he stopped loving us. If he changes, it will only be because someone convinced him we were gone." Elena cried until sunrise. The monster she had imagined suddenly looked like a man whose heart had been buried alive. The next morning, Detective Victor Hale requested a private meeting with Elena. He had worked organized crime cases for nearly 30 years. Unlike the reporters, he wasn't interested in headlines. He wanted answers. As Elena shared Isabella's journal, Victor's expression slowly changed. He recognized several names written in the margins: judges, politicians, business leaders, people who had built spotless public reputations. One name appeared more often than the others: Senator Adrian Cross. Victor froze. 23 years earlier, Cross had been the prosecutor assigned to a corruption investigation involving several powerful officials. Then, without explanation, the entire case disappeared. Every witness vanished. Every file was sealed, including one witness: Matteo Romano. Victor looked back at Elena. "Did your mother ever mention this man?" Elena nodded. "Only once." She remembered a loose note tucked inside the journal: "Never trust the man who smiles during funerals." The note was signed only with the letter I. Isabella. At that very moment, inside the prison, Matteo received an unexpected visitor. His longtime attorney entered the interview room looking unusually nervous. Without speaking, he slid an old photograph across the table. Matteo stared at it in disbelief. It showed Isabella holding their newborn daughter. But something caught his eye. Standing in the background was a young Senator Adrian Cross, smiling, watching them from across the hospital corridor. Matteo's breathing became uneven. He had never noticed him before. Then another memory surfaced. The night Isabella disappeared, she had begged him to cancel their escape. Not because she no longer loved him, but because she had discovered something dangerous. At the time, Matteo believed fear had changed her mind. Now he realized she had been trying to protect him. Outside the prison walls, Elena returned to her hotel. The room looked untouched, yet something felt wrong. The journal was no longer where she had left it. It rested neatly in the center of the desk. Beside it lay a small black envelope with no name. Inside was a single gold wedding ring. Matteo's wedding ring. The one everyone believed had been buried with Isabella. Folded beneath it was a handwritten note. She never stopped wearing hers. Before Elena could process those words, her phone vibrated. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. A weak, elderly woman's voice whispered only one sentence: "Your mother is gone, but she left something only you can protect." The line went dead. Seconds later, Elena heard the unmistakable sound of someone turning the doorknob from the outside. Slowly, carefully, someone had found her. And this time, they weren't coming to ask questions. The doorknob stopped turning. For one long second, Elena couldn't even breathe. Then 3 sharp knocks echoed through the room. Not loud, not desperate, deliberate. She backed away from the door, clutching Isabella's journal against her chest. Another knock. Before she could react, a familiar voice called from the hallway. Elena, don't open it. It was Detective Victor Hale. The doorknob jerked violently one last time before hurried footsteps disappeared. Down the corridor, Victor entered moments later with 2 officers. Whoever had been outside was gone. But they hadn't come to kill her. They had come for the journal. Victor looked at Elena with growing concern. They're afraid of what's inside. That same afternoon, the DNA results arrived. The courtroom filled once again. This time, there wasn't a single empty seat. The judge opened the sealed envelope. His expression changed immediately. He looked toward Matteo, then toward Elena. The test confirms a 99.99% probability of paternity. A wave of emotion swept across the room. Matteo closed his eyes. For 23 years, he had mourned a daughter who had never truly left this world. When he looked at Elena again, he didn't see the years they had lost. He saw the little girl he had imagined every birthday, every Christmas, every lonely night. Neither of them spoke. Words could never recover 23 stolen years. Then Detective Hale stood. He requested permission to submit newly discovered evidence. The judge agreed. Victor placed Isabella's journal on the evidence table. Hidden inside the back cover was something no one had noticed before. A tiny memory card, carefully stitched beneath the leather. It was removed and connected to the courtroom screen. The lights dimmed. A video began. Static flickered across the monitor. Then Isabella appeared. She looked older than the photographs. Her face carried exhaustion, but her smile was exactly the one Matteo remembered. She looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, then I couldn't come back myself. The courtroom fell silent. Tears immediately filled Matteo's eyes. Isabella took a slow breath. Matteo, if you hate me, I understand. But I need you to know something. I never left because I stopped loving you. I left because they gave me only one choice. She explained everything. The night before they planned to escape, she discovered documents proving several powerful politicians had been using organized crime to eliminate witnesses, manipulate elections, and build their fortunes. Among those names, Adrian Cross. He wasn't fighting corruption. He had been protecting it. When Isabella refused to surrender the evidence, Cross kidnapped her and the newborn baby. His offer was simple: disappear forever, or watch Matteo and your daughter die. She chose exile. For years, she lived under false identities, moving from city to city while secretly gathering evidence against the people who had destroyed her family. She entrusted Elena to a close friend whenever the danger became too great. She watched from a distance as Elena grew into a remarkable young woman, and she watched Matteo become the man the world feared. Each time she wanted to return, Cross reminded her what would happen if she did. Near the end of the recording, Isabella held up her wedding ring. I never took this off. Her voice broke. I know people think Matteo became a monster. They're wrong. They buried the man I loved beside an empty coffin. Then she smiled through tears. Matteo, don't waste what's left of your life chasing revenge. Love our daughter enough for both of us. The video ended. No one moved. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. Detective Hale quietly presented the rest of Isabella's evidence. Financial records, secret recordings, witness statements. Enough to expose Cross and several powerful officials who had spent decades hiding behind respectable titles. Within hours, arrests began. Not because Matteo demanded revenge, but because Isabella had spent the last years of her life making sure the truth could never be buried again. Days later, every major charge tying Matteo to the conspiracy collapsed. He still had to answer for mistakes he had made during the years after Isabella disappeared. He accepted responsibility for those choices. But the crimes that had placed him on trial were proven to be built on lies, manipulated witnesses, and fabricated evidence. When he finally walked out of prison, there were no bodyguards waiting, no black luxury cars, no armed convoy, only Elena. She stood quietly at the bottom of the courthouse steps. For a moment, neither of them knew what to do. Then Elena closed the distance between them. She wrapped her arms around the father she had only just found. Matteo held her as though he feared the world might steal her away again. This time, he refused to let go. Several weeks later, they visited a quiet cemetery overlooking the sea. A simple white headstone stood beneath a flowering tree. Isabella Romano. Elena knelt first, placing fresh lilies beside the grave. Matteo removed the leather journal from his coat. For years it had carried unanswered questions. Now it carried peace. Inside the final page was a letter Elena had never noticed. The ink had faded, but every word remained clear. If love finds its way back to you, don't spend another day living in yesterday. Raise our daughter to believe that kindness is stronger than fear. And whenever you look at the ocean, remember that every wave eventually returns home. Matteo gently closed the journal. For the first time in 23 years, he didn't cry because he had lost Isabella. He smiled because she had never truly left his heart. As he and Elena walked away from the cemetery together, they left behind more than flowers. They left behind the guilt, the lies, the anger, and the life that had stolen so much from them. The city would always remember Matteo Romano as a feared mafia boss. But Elena knew the truth. Before he became the man everyone feared, he had simply been a young husband hopelessly in love with one extraordinary woman. And in the end, that love delivered the only verdict that truly mattered. Not guilty of forgetting, not guilty of giving up, only guilty of loving someone for a lifetime.